The history of the United States began with the settlement of indigenous people before 15,000 BC. Numerous cultures formed. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in the year of 1492 started the European colonization of the Americas. Most colonies formed after 1600. By the 1770s, 13 British colonies contained 2.5 million people along the Atlantic coast east of the Appalachian Mountains. The 13 colonies were British colonies of people on the east coast of North America. A colony is an area of a country that is controlled by another country. The 13 colonies were in America but controlled by Britain. The 13 colonies were Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New York, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. The very first colonies lived in Jamestown, Virginia. These were the first English people to live in America. In the 1760s, the southern colonies came together and protested against the taxes they had to pay to the British government. This fight was known as the American Revolutionary War. On July 4, 1776, the 13 colonies declared themselves at war with Britain. There had been so many protests over recent years, like the Boston Tea Party, and people no longer wanted to be part of the British Empire. Instead, they formed their own new nation that they called the United States of America. In 1776, the Second Continental Congress declared the independence of the colonies as the United States of America. Led by General George Washington, it was won the Revolutionary War with large support from France. The Peace Treaty of 1783 gave the new nation the land east of the Mississippi River, except Canada and Florida. In 1619, a Dutch ship brought 20 Africans to the new British colony of Jamestown, Virginia. The slaves were needed to work in the quickly growing tobacco industry there. After that, slavery spread throughout the American colonies. Over the next 200 years, millions more would arrive to work large tobacco, indigo, and rice plantations. What would become the United States during the colonial era? In 1861, after Abraham Lincoln was elected as a president, 11 southern states that supported slavery declared their succession from the United States and denounced the formation of the Confederate States of America because there were some conflicts between the North and the South. The biggest conflict was about slavery that North and Lincoln didn't support. The American Civil War lasted for just 4 years, from 1861 and 1865. The biggest result was the end of slavery. The 13th Amendment called for the abolishment of slavery, and it was in support of President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. There was happening a war between Spain and the United States of America in the year 1898. This war was fought in part because a lot of people wanted Cuba to become independent and also because many Americans wanted their country to get a colonial empire. Spain lost the Sea War and had to give up its colonies of Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and part of Guam. The war stopped when the Treaty of Paris was signed on December 10, 1898 by the United States and Spain. The United States became the owners of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The American entry into World War I came on April 6, 1917, after more than 2.5 years of efforts by President Woodrow Wilson to keep the United States out of the war. The reason for America to become involved in World War I was Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, which had already sunk several American ships which provided supplies to the Allies. When the war ended, unlike the countries of Europe, the factories and home of the United States had not been destroyed. Manufacturing, production, and efficiency had increased through necessity during the Great War. America had emerged as a world industrial leader, and the United States economy was booming. Profits were increasing, which led to the period in American history called the Roaring Twenties, with a massive rise in consumerism for the wealthy. On the negative side, inflation was high, and companies and corporations started to reduce wages and lay off workers to keep down operating costs. The of wealth and excess of the Roaring Twenties ended abruptly with the 1929 Wall Street crash. The Wall Street crash of 1929, also known as Black Tuesday or the stock market crash, began in late October 1929 when share prices began to fall. $30 billion was lost in the space of 2 days. The crash led to the ruin of many Americans and was followed by the Great Depression. The Great Depression affected both classes and became the biggest financial crisis the nation had ever known. In some years, the United States regained their economic stability, but this depression is one of the major reasons for the start of World War II. The military history of the United States in World War II covers the war against Germany, Italy, and Japan, starting with the 7th December 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. During the final stage of World War II, the United States detonated 2 nuclear weapons over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945 respectively. The United States dropped the bombs after obtaining the consent of the United Kingdom as required by the Quebec Agreements. Domestically, the war ended the Great Depression as hundreds of thousands of people, many of them women, went into the defense industries. The Cold War began not too long after World War II ended in 1945. Rivalry between capitalist America and communist Russia, despite coming together against Germany at their time of need. By 1945, it was clear that the two countries had different foreign policy ambitions. While Stalin sought to spread the communist ideology as wide and as far as possible, the USA leaders overwhelmingly attempted to contain it. The Cold War was often fought between the superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union in something called the proxy war. These were wars fought between other countries, but with each side getting support from a different superpower. Examples of proxy wars include the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Yom Kippur War, and the Soviet-Afghanistan War. The Cold War came to an end with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. On September 11, 2001, 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 airplanes and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States. The NATO invaded Afghanistan in order to remove the Taliban regime, which harbored Al-Qaeda, and to capture Al-Qaeda forces. The response of the United States government to the September 11th attacks included funds for affected families, plans for the war on terrorism, the building of Lower East Manhattan, and the invasion and investigation of Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, the United States of America is a federal constitutional republic made of 50 states and a federal district. Donald Trump is the president, and the country is still the first economic and military power of the world.